Welcome to Athar's Garage. In this video, I'll be working on the Team Associated B6.4 Bag 2. So let's get started. Alright, so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to install our steering assembly onto the chassis. And this chassis is beautiful, nicely machined, beautiful anodizing, very nice quality. Love it. Alright, so we're going to install the steering assembly and ball stud mount onto the chassis, and the kit comes with two plastic bulkheads. You have a 0-degree setting, a -2 and a minus 2.5 and a plus 2.5 setting. I highly recommend getting a aluminum or steel bulkhead. It'll give a bit more durability to the car, so I will not be using this. So I'm going to set that aside. So the part number for the aluminum bulkhead is 91987. I put a link in the description below on where you can get this. Highly recommend that you support your local hobby shop if they have this, or if you consider supporting my hobby shop that I go to, HoustonRC. There's a link down below where you can contact them. So as of this video, there is no steel bulkhead made specifically for the B6.4. However, you can use the steel bulkhead from J Concepts, I believe, and Associated from the B6.3, and it should bolt right up. All right, so it's 0-degree. This weighs 12 grams. So we're gonna go ahead and install this with two M3x14 flathead cap screws. So there's a note saying to use the 14mm long screws because there are also 16mm long screws in this bag. So double check with page 3 that you're using the correct hardware. So these bosses here on the bottom of the ball stud mount will mount in these two holes on the chassis. So you can line up everything just like so. Flip the chassis over and you can install your aluminum or plastic bulkhead. And these two 14mm screws are going to install in the rear holes here and here. When we put on the front bumper, we'll be using these two holes. You don't need to tighten down too hard because you are going into plastic. You don't want to strip anything out. So there we go. So that's bag 2, step 1. We can move on to the next step. Everything still moves nice and free. So next, what we're going to do, we have to install the battery foams in these two channels here and here. We also need to install the servo weight and the ESC weight. So I'm going to take some alcohol and just clean the chassis, make sure there's no oil or anything. And we can go ahead and install our battery foam. We're going to need 6 M2x3 flathead screws. They're going to be these little tiny screws. And these are going to be used to install the weights. And my B6.3, I didn't run the weights, didn't find it necessary, but I'm gonna go ahead and install these because this is the kit setup. I'm going to install it and then tune the car after I build it. So go ahead and install the weight. It says to install using blue Loctite. I would only recommend using blue Loctite if you have quality tools, because I've seen pretty much everyone who installs these with Loctite, they end up stripping these. So I'm actually going to leave them out. I'm not going to use Loctite just because I'm pretty sure I'm going to end up removing these screws. So we're going to install 4 screws in these holes for the ESC tray. Now we can install the servo weight, and we're going to install the screws in these 2 holes. The Associated buggy is heavy compared to the Schumacher that we usually race against at our local club. I found that removing the weights helped bring the weight down on the Associated quite a bit. You're looking at about 57 grams of weight if you remove these 2 pieces. So next we can install our side rails. We're going to need 4 M3 by 10 flathead screws and 5 M3 by 8 flathead screws, along with our side rails. So we're going to install the 4 M3 by 10 flathead screws in these 4 holes up here, and then move on to the M3 by 8 holes, or the M3 by 8 flathead screws. Okay, I got those started, and now we're going to install the M3 by 8 screws in these 5 holes. This hole is not going to use a screw right now. This is going to be used for the fan mount or a plug, depending on whether or not you're going to use a fan. Also, there are some more foam that you can install for your battery pack on the side rails. I typically don't install those because it makes the fit of the battery extremely tight. So just check to see whether or not your battery is loose and if you need that foam. There we go. So I know I could have used an electric screwdriver, but when I'm building kits, I sometimes don't like to use electric screwdrivers. Yeah, it makes things faster, but you can also makes it easier for you to mess up. So I recommend using hand tools. That way you can make sure that you don't over tighten anything. All right, so I'm gonna set the chassis aside for now, and we're going to get our steering servo ready for installation. So I'm going to be reusing the servo that I used in my B6.3. It's a 160 SS from ProTech. This is a good servo to use, or another one that I would highly recommend is the 160 TBL. It's got very similar speed and has more torque, so that one is probably actually better. I bought this because I wanted speed. I've already centered this up, and I'm going to be reusing my servo horn that came off my B6.3 You can use the servo horn that comes in the kit. I would highly recommend upgrading to the aluminum one, and the aluminum one is specific to the B6.3. Part number is 1370. I've put a link down in the description below for you to check it out. But I used the plastic one on my B6.3 until my first bad crash and it broke. And I had to fix it during a race, which was not fun. So highly recommend getting the aluminum horn. So we're going to use the 8mm ball stud. We're also going to need a M3x6 button head cap screw. And I highly recommend installing these two items with Loctite if you're using the aluminum servo horn. I know a lot of people don't do this, but I recommend putting a little bit of Loctite on the screw that goes into the servo as well, because I've seen these back out. So you want to make sure you line it up. I have the servo centered already, and you want to line it up 90 degrees from the servo, just like so. And then along with this little set screw, I recommend installing some blue Loctite as well, because you don't want this to back out either. I've seen these loosen up over time and people have sloppy steering. So servo is now ready. We need to create our link. So we're going to need these two items here, along with the 1mm washer and an M3x10 set screw. So here's a tip for you guys and gals, is that I've seen this happen on many people's cars where the steering link rips out from the set screw. That's because usually this is installed all the way in and you only have a few threads holding this on. So this is 10mm. You're putting a 1mm washer in between. That means you want roughly 4.5mm in both links. So that being said, we're going to go ahead and screw this in, and we want to have about 5.5mm being exposed when it's installed. It's close to 5.5. Going to go ahead and install our washer, and then I'm going to install our other steering link. The steering link is assembled. The holes aren't going to be lining up perfectly. They're supposed to be that way. It doesn't give an angle, but you'll notice once we install it onto the vehicle. So now we can get the servo mount ready. So we're going to get the servo mount brace. Now we need our servo mounts, along with two M3x6 button head cap screws. And we will be installing these screws using some blue Loctite. So these mounts are identical, so it doesn't matter which side you install them on. Just notice that the boss on the top here corresponds to the hole in the brace. So all you got to do is install that and line it up, and you can install your M3 by 6 screw, just like so. And just get it snug. You don't want it too tight because then you're going to start to deform the plastic. There you go. Now we're going to use the M3 by 6 low profile screws to install our servo onto the servo mount. There are servo spacers on one of the parts trees right here. If you're using a low profile servo, which I do recommend because it does save weight, you don't need to use those spacers. All right, so the way this is going to install is like so. We have the holes like so, and it's just going to line up perfectly like that. And then we're going to install these low profile screws with blue Loctite. I'm just going to get all the screws started, make sure everything lines up, and then I will go ahead and tighten it down. Everything's lined up. I'm actually pushing the servo up just so it doesn't contact the chassis. Everything is tight, and now we can get our sway bar ready. Be careful opening up this bag. There are a lot of small set screws in here, so make sure I only opened it up when I needed it. So for this step, we're going to need our chassis. We're going to need our sway bar. It's a 1 millimeter sway bar. We're going to need the anti-roll bar collar and the M3 by 2.5 set screw, which is the shortest set screw in the bag. And if I'm not mistaken, it is going to be this silver colored one. It doesn't say to, but I like to add just a bit of blue Loctite on this set screw so it doesn't back out. So we can go ahead and install our set screw, and you don't want to over tighten it, you just want to center it, and then once you feel it shoulder up, just snug it up just a little bit more. If you tighten it too much, you can actually bend the sway bar, so you don't want to do that. So it's going to install here, make sure it moves side to side and looks even on both sides. Now we can go ahead and install our servo onto the chassis. We're going to end up using these 2 holes to mount onto the chassis. We're going to need 2 M3 by 10 flathead screws, and we will be installing this using blue Loctite. So line up your holes and then go ahead and install your M3 by 10 flathead screw. All right, everything's installed. Now we can go ahead and install our sway bar right here onto the front ball stud mount. And then we're going to get our top plate. So we're gonna go ahead and install the top plate like so. And we're gonna use two M3 by 14 button head cap screws in these two holes to secure it into place. Moving on to back to step 7, we're going to need two M3 by 10 button head cap screws. We're going to install these two in these two holes, and they're going to go into the ball stud mount. Make sure you don't tighten it too much, because if you do, the string bell crank feels like it might bind up. So ensure that you have free movement. You can see it's bound up, so I'm going to back off until I feel that it's smooth. In the sway bar bag, there were two M3 by 3 set screws, and we're going to install them in these two holes here. What we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and tighten them down until we feel them hit the sway bar, and then we're going to back it off just a little bit. We want to make sure that there's free movement of the sway bar side to side and being able to rotate freely. So you can see it doesn't rotate freely, so we're going to back off until it will rotate freely, just like so. And it can move side to side freely as well. Now we need our front control arms. The front arms are directional. It says an L for the left side over here and the R for the right side over here. So we need the front anti-roll bar link, which is shown in back to step 7 right here, part number 91820. However, this is not going to be in this bag. In the B6.3 manual, they had a note letting you know that this is in a different bag, but that's not the case in this particular manual. So it's going to be in bag 9, which is where the shocks are in. So if you look here, you can see them right here. That's exactly what we need. So I'm going to go ahead and cut open this bag and grab them. So we're going to start installing the front suspension. We're going to install two M2 by 4 button head cap screws in the rear of the control arm in this small hole next to where the hinge pin will install. And be careful to not over tighten this. You just want to screw this in until it's shouldered and it's good. And this is going to help capture the hinge pin. So I'm actually going to turn over the car so we can see better. So there we go. So this front hinge pin brace has a smooth side and a rough side, and you'll feel it in your hands. You want to face the sharp edge towards the bulkhead, like so. And then we can line up our control arms. Now, in the next step, which is back to step 8, is when we install the hinge pins. But since I have these right here, I'm going to go ahead and install the hinge pins. But before I do that, I'm going to go ahead and polish these up to make them nice and super smooth. So the way I polish them is to use some Antiroll and a drill. So just take some Antiroll You check up lightly on the hinge pin and the drill, and the hinge pin only rotates on the end in the control arm itself, so you don't need to polish the whole pin. So all I do is check it up and then rotate, and then I'm gonna go ahead and do the other end. Those are polished. They do feel smoother than they were before. I'm just gonna wipe them down with a microfiber towel, make sure there's no fibers or anything on there. So we can go ahead and install our hinge pins. You want to make sure they move nice and free, which it does. No binding or anything, that's perfect. So we're going to go ahead and install the set screws that came with our bulkhead in the kit. These set screws are M3x3, but if you're using the aluminum one or the steel one, I highly recommend using some Loctite so these don't back out. But basically push the hinge pin all the way back and then put in the set screws. So if you decide to use the B6.3 bulkhead that has the 2.5 plus or minus caster, you want to use a different caster insert to get the kit set up in terms of caster. So if you use the plus 2.5, that's going to give you 25 degrees of caster, which is the stock setup. You want to use the 0 degree inserts in the next step, or in the next bag, sorry. All right, so everything moves nice and free. And since we're already here, we can go ahead and install our front bumper. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and install the front bumper with two M3x16 flathead screws. And make sure you don't over tighten, because if you do, you can end up warping the front bumper a little bit. There we go. I can move back towards the bag 2 step 7 and install our anti-roll bar pivots and anti-roll bar links. So we're going to use the M3x3 set screws that were in the set screw bag, and I'm going to install some blue Loctite because I don't want to lose these screws. And I'm going to just install a few threads into there. Next, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and install the anti-roll bar pivot onto the roll bar. And it doesn't say to, but install the anti-roll bar pivot flush with the end of the anti-roll bar, and you want to try to have the set screw facing up just in case you want to make adjustments. It'll make your life easier. And you don't want to tighten it too much because you can end up bending the roll bar. So we can go ahead and do the other side. There we go. Everything still moves nice and free. So now we can go ahead and install our anti-roll bar links. I like these links because they're fixed, unlike the rear links, which I think you have to build out yourself. So you can go ahead and install these. I find it easy to install the anti-roll bar link using some type of leverage, just like so. Unfortunately, it's kind of hard to use some leverage on the top side. So little bit of binding on the rod end over here, and hopefully that's going to loosen up with some run time. So now I can move forward to back to step 9, which is going to be installing the front shock tower. So we're going to need 2 M3 by 20 button head cap screws, and the shock tower does install in a certain orientation. Usually has gull wing written on the back side of the front shock tower. You'll notice that you have some countersunk holes in the front, so just take note of that. Screws go in from the front side of the shock tower, so the side that has the countersunk holes is where you have to install the M3 by 20 button head cap screws from. So we want to install some blue Loctite on these screws because you don't want these shock bushings to get loose. I've seen these come loose on other people's cars, so I always add a little bit of blue Loctite to help ensure that they don't come loose. Nice and snug. So now we can install our shock tower guard. It's nice that the car comes with it. If your car comes with it, please install it if you're running on carpet, because it helps protect the carpet from getting ripped when you crash. So the way the shock tower guard is going to install is that we're going to install the tower nut, which is this piece, from the side the shock standoffs are on. The tower guard is going to cover up the screw heads, and we're going to need 2 M2.5 by 6 button head cap screws, and the M2.5 by 6 button head cap screws are going to install in these 2 holes here and here from the front. There we go. So I actually forgot to install the servo steering link in bag 2, step 4 and step 5. So I'm going to go ahead and install that. What I find easy is to move the servo kind of towards the center and then use some type of leverage to pop it on, or using some needle nose pliers. So now we can install our front shock tower along with the front wing mount. I usually run the front wing mount. A lot of people don't, but some people say it's got too much front grip, but I seem to always have good luck running it, so I'm going to go ahead and install it. The front wing mount installs in the top 2 holes, and in the bottom 2 holes we're going to install 2 M3 by 10 flathead screws in the bottom 2 holes and 2 M3 by 14 flathead screws in the top 2 holes. If you decide not to run the front wing mount, just use 2 M3 by 10 flathead screws on the top. So I find it easier to install the bottom 2 screws first and then install the front wing mount All right, so off camera, I was looking over the car and I was kind of concerned about how the sway bar end link was binding up. So from my B6.4 kit, I had some of these pieces already. So I decided to try those on. It was still tight. So then I decided to flip the link and it was fine. So then I took the stock link that came with the B6.4 kit and I tried flipping it and it worked. So now you can see there's no binding whatsoever. Nice and smooth on both sides. So the other thing that I noticed was an issue with the steering link. So when you turn in this direction, the link actually hits there. The link actually hits the top mount. So I've seen this before on another B6.4 I've worked on. So all I'm gonna do is take a hobby knife and trim some material off. Additionally, you could use a Dremel or something, but I don't want to take too much material off. So I'm just gonna take a hobby knife and trim some material until I don't have any interference there. There we go. So no more interference. You see there's a nice gap in between the link and the top mount. So that's exactly what you want. So check on your kit. You may have that issue. I think it's just a tolerance stack up between the new steering hat bushings that you had to put underneath the bell cranks and the new top mount. I think maybe they need to work on their molds and some of the design may be causing that. So, but that's it for bag 2. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. Please like and subscribe if you did. Let me know down in the comments below if you had any issues, and I'll do my best to help you out. So thanks again for watching. Stay tuned for the next video, which is going to be bag 3, and I'll see y'all in the next one.